Hi, and welcome to Manuscript to Publish the Essential Steps to Success. I'm Kathleen Kaiser, president of the Writers and Publishers Network, which is sponsoring this session. And the three ladies that I have with me today are people that I have worked with that I find so knowledgeable in what they do, and they have helped so many writers that are members of our group and just writers in general that I know. And so that's what I've brought them here to help you. And they're, to me, once you've written the manuscript, you've got to understand that is just the beginning. Okay, now you're into the rest of the process, which is the other 45% of the work to be done. And the most important part, if you're looking for an agent or even if you're self-publishing, is editing, because you have to have a clean, well-written, edited book. And Naomi has worked with a number of people that I know, some beautiful books, some that have won awards. Her editor, she has a group and she's with the Artful Editor. And so, Naomi, why don't you tell us some of the most essential things that people don't understand about why they need really good editing on their manuscript?
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, it's a great question. As we all know, writing is already difficult and something also very personal, and we have so many hopes tied up with our manuscript. But really, no book is ever perfect, certainly not out the gate. And we all have our blind spots. And if we're trying to query our manuscript, the competition is pretty fierce, and editor agents are very particular. So really, it's really behooves you to hire a professional to look at your manuscript. Of course, there are writers out there who have a great writing group and maybe know other writers, and they do a great, an exchange of their work. But if you're someone who maybe has that but isn't quite getting enough feedback, or maybe you're isolated or you don't have that community, hiring an editor is extremely helpful. So there are different types of editing, and it can be kind of confusing to know which type of service to get. Usually I often recommend starting with a big picture feedback. And there's two types. There's the manuscript critique, and then there's developmental editing. So the critique is really where the editor, someone who knows your genre, is going to read your manuscript, and they'll take notes as they read, and they'll collect their thoughts into an editorial letter. And in that letter, they're going to tell you honestly what their findings are, and in also a very gentle way too. I mean, it's not an opportunity for the editor to tear you down or to destroy your manuscript. It's really kind of loving thing to do, because they want you to have the best book that you could write, and it's their job to identify what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, ask questions, offer potential solutions, and hand that over to you. And then you revise. So that could be extremely helpful. The next level is developmental editing. And you might be the type of person who needs really specific feedback. So in addition to the editorial letter, you also get comments in your draft. So the editor uses track changes. They write comments in the margins. They tell you specifically what they're finding, what they suggest, rethinking. They might even do like a sample edit of a section to kind of model how you could approach your revision. So it's extremely helpful. It is more time consuming. It's almost maybe twice the amount of time as a critique. And it's not for everyone. Like, a critique is great if you really don't, you'll get overwhelmed by too much feedback and you just want the big picture. And also if you're on a budget. But a dev edit is like where you just get a little more thorough feedback. And then there's the line edit. And line editing is great if you struggle with revision. You may not realize maybe that you are making certain mistakes in your prose. It's a sentence level edit. So this time it's really about drilling in on how you're using language, how you're describing a scene, and point of view, verb tense. And then the line editor will, in some cases, just fix your writing for you. So like say in a dev edit, you have an issue with point of view or head hopping, which is where you have two characters kind of each, like the point of view switches from one character to another in a scene. The line editor actually might just fix that for you. And that could be very valuable. And then following that is copy editing. And copy editing is great for every writer. It's very common. It's really required if you're self-publishing, because unlike line editing, copy editing is technical. Now we're going to go in and polish your writing, like all the errors, grammar, punctuation, errors in your grammar, punctuation, spelling errors, consistency issues. So a book has so many details, even not whether it's nonfiction or fiction. There's so many details to track. And like, for example, we copy edited a novel, and like there's several characters where the name spelling changes. There's like 2 or 3 different variations of the same name, and it's the copy editor's job to catch that. I've also seen problems where someone looks out their window, it's raining outside, but then they step out and it's sunny. How did that happen? So the copy editor checks for those things and makes sure that your story is consistent from beginning to end and correct. And then finally, it's proofreading. And proofreading is really that final like chance to catch errors and to make your book as error-free as possible, because no one likes, opening a book and seeing, a bunch of typos. So the proofreader is like that fresh pair of eyes who goes in and, the copy editor can only, they try to catch all the errors, but the error, if they're lucky, they'll catch like 90%. So that proofreader goes in and tries to catch the 10% that was missed. And also if a writer like added and revised some things last minute, the proofreader can catch that. Another thing is the proofreader can look for formatting issues. So like if the photos are maybe there's certain photos that are missing that should be there, or the captions are incorrect, or the table of contents don't match the chapter headings. These are things that are very valuable in the proofread. And even like the title doesn't match what's in the book. And I have found that it's very embarrassing. So you don't want to publish a book and like, oh my gosh, that was not the title. And I think that covers it for now. I'll hand it back to you, Kathleen.
You're muted, Kathleen.
Well, I'm not going to do that again. It's one of the things I find most interesting is that people have had friends edit books, even people, manuscripts, and even people that were editors at magazines or something. And I pick it up, I get it from the client, I'm looking at it, and it's like, oh, there's mistakes here. And we sent one off, and the guy says, oh, no, the book's perfect. I said, let's just do 50 pages, over 800 mistakes. Okay. Most of them grammatical, punctuation, problems like that, tense, that wasn't found by the other editor. And it's one thing that will throw your readers off in your manuscript if you don't have it properly edited. But let's say you've got your editing done. Now, if you're going to be looking to get a query letter, you're going to have an author platform of some set up. So, Adanna, tell us about the author platform.
Yeah, so I was going to just kind of go over like a pre-launch, what you need to do for your book and how to market and all of that. And I think the most important thing is to start with your website. Most people don't start at their website, but I think that starting with your website gives you a place to kind of, really think about who you are and how you want to present to the world. And that clicks all the other pieces in like Legos. So having to like sit back and think about like, before you do anything, what's your genre? Because you can't have a website that doesn't match your genre. You can't have social media that doesn't match your genre. Like it just doesn't, it won't bring in an audience because they're used to seeing certain things. So I think that before you do anything, you think about who you are, what you're trying to portray, and what your genre is. And that kind of becomes your brand, right? Like, you are your brand, your books are your products, and that's what you're selling, really. So you start there, and then you start thinking about your aesthetic, and you think about your writing, and you think about how you want to convey yourself. Like, do you want to be serious? Do you want to be playful? Do you want to be whimsical? And that all kind of becomes your brand voice. So just like in a company, if you were creating a company and not trying to sell a book, you would do the same thing. You would go through the same steps. You would pick colors, and you would pick font, and you would create a logo, and you would figure out what your voice sounds like and how people are going to interpret you when they land on your platform on a whole. And then design your website. It doesn't matter if you don't have a book cover yet. It doesn't matter if you're still in your first draft. It doesn't matter. Like, none of that matters, because what you're doing is you're starting something from scratch, and you get to evolve, and everything should evolve as your story evolves. You already have social media, it doesn't matter. Like, build your website from your social media. But if you're brand new and it's your first book and you've never done anything, start with your website, because you can use it as a mood board. And I think it's a beautiful way to do that, because you can create something on your website, you can pull it into your social media, you can pull it into your newsletter, and everything becomes this kind of symbiotic, beautiful thing that you create and send out into the world. But I think it's really important to make sure that your website can grow with you. If you're on book 1 and you're planning for book 2, don't create a website that just fits into one book, right? You want to be able to take that and add other books without having to recreate a website, especially if you're going to pay somebody like me to do it, because it's money out of your pocket unless you can make it whole. And okay, I wanted to talk about blogs, because a lot of people think that blogs have become old-fashioned and that you don't need to do them anymore, and that using your social media in place of a blog is fine. And I totally disagree with that for 2 reasons. One, a blog, when an agent or a producer or a potential reader land on your website, shows that you can write. You can write about whatever. You can write about your life. You can write about writing tips, like writing about writing. You can give your audience little snippets of chapters or things maybe that you cut that aren't going to be in the final book. You can play with it and make it your own and have some fun. But I think that it's a really great place to show that you are really dedicated to your craft and that you are a writer. The second is that it really helps with search engines. So without a blog, you're less likely to have your website found than if you have a blog. It's just the way that the algorithms work on Google or whatever the other things are. Bing, Yahoo, like, they all exist, and they all need something for their little bots to go in and find you. So that all being said, social media is still super important. You need both. Your author website is like this little hub that goes out into all of your other things. It goes into your social media, it goes to your publisher, it goes to wherever your books are sold. It has places for people to sign up for your newsletter, but your social channels are how people are going to find you. Like, without a doubt, social networking is still the way to do it. And I think that it's really important to remember your aesthetic, like what you created for your website. Try to pull that in. If you're unsure, start looking at other people in your genre. Like, go to their websites, go to their social media, sign up for their newsletter, and devour as much of those as you can, not to copy, but to understand what's working inside your genre, because every genre is different. What works for romance does not work for sci-fi or memoir. I mean, what works for sci-fi is definitely not going to be the same for like if you're writing a memoir or a narrative nonfiction or whatever, right? Like they're really, really different. And you have to style your everything, your whole platform off what is happening inside your genre. It doesn't mean you can't play with it. I think everybody should have fun. Like, please have fun with it. There's no real formula. There are formulas, but there's no real formula. So, make it your own. I think it's really important, I can't stress this enough, to not go on your social medias and only promote. If you only promote, nobody's going to follow you. Nobody's going to care about you. Nobody's going to want to read your books. The current formula is 80-20. That is right. 20% promotion, 80% you. It seems little, but if you look at people who promote all the time, if like you're on Instagram and you follow someone and all they do is my next book signing, my next book, my next this, my next that, you scroll right by them. There's a reason that influencers exist in our world, because they share what appears to be their personal life, and people like that. And they want that from authors too. We're all friends. Everybody wants to be friends with you. So make that 80% you. You don't have to get deep. You don't have to share really personal things unless you want to, but you can make it appear that you are. Share your food, share your writing space, show your cats and dogs, your day at the beach, your drink poolside, like whatever it is. You don't have to share your kids. You don't have to tell people where you are in the moment, but making it appear like you are an open book makes people want to buy your book. And the current statistic for social media is 80% of people that follow you will buy your book. So if you have 1,000 followers, that's 800 book sales. If you have 10,000 followers, that's 8,000 book sales. So if you curate your social channels properly, it's a really good avenue to sell your books organically. But you can't start your social media 2-3 months before your book comes out. You need to give it time to have organic growth and have people who are interested in your book come to you, right? So you start your website before your book comes out. You need to start your social media a minimum of a year before your book comes out. But that's a minimum. I would say the longer, the better. If you know that you have a book coming out in 4 years, start your social media now. My last thing is all of this leads into a newsletter, which is still the best place to sell to your audience. So using your social channels and using your website to build a newsletter list that you can send, people. You might think you have nothing to say, but use your blogs, use your social media posts. You can repurpose everything into a newsletter. Like you can repurpose everything into a newsletter. And so don't feel like it's so overwhelming. You can create a calendar that will tell you, what you need to do. Like you can create that. You can use AI to help you create that. And you can, look at it and plan your newsletter, your social posts, what your blog's going to be on that calendar. So you don't have to overwhelm yourself and schedule everything out. And, all you have to do is check in and talk to people. And, it sounds overwhelming, but it's not if you start way, way before your book comes out. Mm-hmm. And the last little bit that I think goes with everything is doing hashtag research. Because if you hashtag research, you can also turn those into keywords that you use on your blog, on the back end of your website, and in your social posts. And if you pick like 3 to 5 that you use every time, it will become a thing that when people search those keywords, you come up with them.
Very good. And it is something that you need to start way in advance. I'd say once you've started the first 3 chapters and you know you're going forward, work on your social media. So we'll start there. So we've gotten a well-edited script. You've set up your author platform. You want to have a traditional publisher. You need a query letter that agents will pick up. So Leslie, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Wow, that is so much information. And exactly like Kathleen said, if you want a traditional publisher, this is a very different thing than independently publishing. But if you do want a traditional publisher, you do need an agent. And I don't want you to be afraid of agents. I know people think of them as the wicked people who are the gatekeepers, but they are very helpful when you get a contract and with your royalties and with your payments. And it's very important to have one. That said, it only takes one. And as opposed to all the other things that Adanna said and all the editing, do not send out a query letter until you have done all the things that Naomi said. You want your project ready, especially that sample. But the purpose of a query letter, a lot of people think a query letter gets you an agent, and it really doesn't. What it does is it begins the process like you're dating. It's the equivalent of swiping right on an online dating site. You want to put up your best, wear your best dress, get your hair done, make sure all your typos are there, and you want to let that person know exactly who you are. So they want to read a sample. And a sample is the next step of really getting to know you. And that's why it's so important to have a good sample, which is about 50 pages or 3 chapters, and it needs to be perfect. Because if you send out a query letter, and if and when they get back to you, you're not ready, you may miss that opportunity. They may no longer be interested in that genre. They may no longer have relationships with the editors who would be appropriate for your book. They may have picked up another manuscript that will compete with yours. You want to send your query letter out when you are ready. That said, a query letter is a sales tool. It is completely different than your manuscript. You do need to know a little bit about narrative drive for part of it, but otherwise it's completely a tool that you can use. But I also want to tell you that right now, I'd say more than half of the agents out there are using online query letter submission forms, but they're not all the same. And my sense is that the reason they're doing that is because with the hundreds of query letters that they're getting every week, they're mostly bad. And they're not being able to find the information they need fast enough. So what I want to tell you today is how to actually design your query letter so that it is not only efficient for people who want to have the query letter itself, but also you can take it apart and you can use the parts of it for those manuscript, entry forms. And as most Kathleen knows, my specialty is in story structure and query letters. I'm not a tech person, but I do like little arts and crafts. So I made you a little diagram of the ideal query letter. Here it is. The ideal query letter is 3 paragraphs. And I'm going to quote something most of you guys already know of. It's called the hook, the book, and the cook. This is something you can Google. It's a tried and true classic format of a query letter. The first paragraph is the hook. And that's where you introduce yourself to the agent. And if you have a referral, that's ideal. If you met them or have a reason to, query them, like, they really represent certain kind of books that you are trying to offer them, that's your first sentence. But you don't really even have to worry about that intro sentence. The most important part of that paragraph is the title. Start with your title, the word count, the genre, and then you need a premise line, which is probably the most difficult thing. It's not a pitch sentence. It's not a high concept hook of this movie meets that movie. It's one sentence that talks about your hero as the underdog trying to obtain a very difficult goal with very high stakes. And that describes your book in that one sentence, in that first information paragraph. And then beyond that, in that paragraph, you need to have 3 comps. And I have clients all the time who will comp. Comp is complementary or comparative. essentially, it's books that will show the agent, who can then show the marketing department at the publisher that there is an audience for your book. So right there in your query letter, you're doing some marketing for them, writing your first paragraph. You're introducing them to the fact that there are readers for your book. So you need to have 3 books that preferably are published in the last 5 years, but not major bestsellers from 10 years ago, classics. You can use that if you're doing a nonfiction book that you also need a query letter for. But also there are a lot of authors who are bestsellers who maybe have a book that's similar to yours. That's not a wise comp either, because those readers are always going to buy that author's work. So that's the information paragraph. And like it is here, if somebody asks you those questions on a format, you just take it and you put it in that square and you cut and paste. So that's a really important information paragraph. The second one is the book. That's the synopsis. And the synopsis is not a summary. You don't want to take the whole paragraph talking what your book is about. If you talk about what the story is, the plot, the agent will know what the themes are. You also don't want to spend a whole paragraph setting up your story. You need to start with the hero and actually have events and the goal that the hero has, the obstacles, and several of the major events and opponents and actions leading up to the big climax. And then you can leave them with a question. This is a really unique factor in the query letter. You want to leave suspense so that the agent wants to know what happens next. And you always want to write it in present tense. You want to make it very exciting, and you don't want to mess it up with any subplots. If you do have other points of view, you want to indicate that in other sentences. And that might be a reason to split it up into 2 paragraphs, but I completely recommend 1 paragraph. If you can get your story in 1 paragraph, it shows how much work you've done. And also it will help you expand it into a 1-page synopsis, which your agents will ask you for, because they're not going to have time to pass your whole book around and have everybody else who needs to approve it. And also on those query submission forms, a lot of times they will ask for 1 page. But in the query letter, all you need is that succinct 1 paragraph. And this is the easiest thing to just take off and put in that square in the submissions packet, no matter where you're querying. The last paragraph is what we call the cook, and that's you. That's the writer. And don't be worried. I know a lot of you with us today may not be very experienced, or this may be your first book or your first book of this kind. That's okay. This paragraph isn't about how many $1 million bestsellers you've written. You want to get an agent by telling them that you are serious, you're a professional in your efforts. And so if you've published anything, whether it's a newsletter, essays, blogs, books in other areas, definitely mention that up first, because that shows that you've honed your practice and you're serious. If you have a lot of articles, don't mention the titles. That's not really appropriate unless they're right on topic. Generally, they want to know the most prestigious things you've done, where you've published that could impress somebody. If you have had a bestseller in some area, or even if you've had a PTA newsletter that you've done for 10 years, that counts as writing and publishing too. Then any education, whether you have an MFA, that's always great. But if you have education that has to do with the topic of your book, that's really special. And then personal experience in terms of why you're writing this book, what makes you the perfect person. But this isn't just important in nonfiction, also in novels of all kinds. If you're fascinated with this, or you grew up with some sort of mystery in your life and that made you, want to write about it, that's really important to tell them, because then they know all about you. This also is the paragraph where you talk about your platform. If you don't have it yet, don't say you will have a website, you will have 1 million followers. Don't waste words here. You have 1 page to make a really good impression. Say what you have, what's happening now. If you follow Adanna's advice, clearly you already have all this going on. But meanwhile, say what's happening with you now. And sometimes that's alumni associations and organizations that show that you know hundreds or thousands of people who will be interested in your book. And finally, you want to do the ask. That last sentence is going to be, would you like to read a sample? Because that's what the query letter is. It is getting out there. It says you're ready, you want to be a professional, and you want to get an agent. And then be human. Make sure and thank the people. If you have room in your 1 page, use a 14-point font and give them a little ease in their eye strain as well. But remember, these people are human. They get 1 million query letters. The more professional yours is, and it takes a long time to make one page that's perfect, and count on it. It will take you weeks to do this if you don't hire help. Even if you do, once you have it nailed, you can use the same query letter over and over, just with different people, different introductions. And remember, it's about having them read your sample. So then you need your sample ready. So that's how you deal with the whole query letter. Back to you, Kathleen.
Thank you. That's part of what this whole thing is. In the end, you could have a really well-edited manuscript. You could have social media going. You can do the perfect query letter. But how good is your manuscript? Because once they've asked for the manuscript, that has to be perfect. That has to tell the story that you've written in that query letter. So let's talk about some of the barriers that some of you have seen. And we'll go back to Leslie with this. What is a hindrance because you work with authors on producing query letters? What are some of the hindrances you've seen they're not wanting to do certain things? What do you see as a problem that they need to get over?
Well, the biggest problem is they want it to be really long. They want to say more and more and more. And really, this is a case of less is more. And it's okay to single space your query letter. In fact, it's good. You're never going to get all that information on one page if you don't. But I would recommend printing it out and looking at it and making sure it's, 250 pages is the average word count for any sort of book. But in a query letter, I'd say you could go up to 400. But if you can keep it, the shorter the better. 350 is really ideal. And just don't go on about stuff that isn't important. Every word must have to be there. So I would say length is the biggest issue. And then in that synopsis paragraph, that's really hard to do. It's nothing like writing a book. The only thing that's similar that Naomi will probably agree with me on is that it must have narrative drive. You need a reason when you're writing a book and when you're structuring your book to have the reader turn the page. That synopsis paragraph, that has to sing. You need the reader to go, oh my gosh, that happens, and then that happens, and that happens, and then what happens? So I would say those are the biggest two downfalls of query letters that I've seen.
Okay, so you mentioned Naomi. Naomi, with working with people, a lot of people are afraid, they're going to change my words. An editor is going to change. How do you make them understand your editor is probably your best friend?
Yeah, I assure them of that. And I, my job is to match them with an editor, unless they choose an editor from the team, but I match them with an editor that resonates with the book, is excited by the sample, so that there's enthusiasm and genuine, interest. And I also tell the writer, at the same time, we're here to make your writing better, to make you a better writer, to make your book better. We're here to help your voice shine. It's not the editor's voice, it's your voice. And everything in general, like when we're with developmental editing or line editing or even copy editing, everything is tracked with track changes. It's not permanent. Everything is a suggestion to some degree. And it's really on the writer to decide what works, what they agree with and what they don't. It's not set in stone.
Yeah. One of the things I find that people do often is they wander and tense, or point of view, they're flipping point of view over and over. And that is, as a reader, because I consume manuscripts and books, I love to read. I hate it when I'm reading and then it's like, hold it, who's talking? And when you've written that and gone over it and over it, you don't see it, because you're already past it in your head. And that's what an outside help, more than just a writer's group, really helps if you're serious about getting an agent. Now, Adanna, tell us what you think with social media. There's so many options out there. Of the two, which two would be the best for writers, do you suggest?
Of the two, but there's more than two.
Which two would you suggest?
I think that without a doubt, like Instagram should probably be your main focus, because it's visual and you can put in captions, and hashtags are a really great way to lead people to you because people follow certain hashtags, which is why I mentioned hashtag research, because making sure that your hashtags are on point for what you're doing will bring people into you. And I think that the other ones depend on you. If you're more comfortable on Facebook, use Facebook. If you're more comfortable on TikTok, use TikTok. If you're more comfortable on Twitter X, use that as like whatever. And I think that it's really important that you don't have to do them all. Pick 2, pick 3 that you're comfortable with, that you know how to use, and start there. You can always add as you go along, but you don't have to do it all. Don't overwhelm yourself. Start small and build. You're building a foundation. That's what you're doing. You're building a foundation. You don't want a rickety, cracked foundation to launch your entire platform on.
No. Explain to them about scheduling. I think that's something many people don't understand that they can do.
Yeah, scheduling's great. There are scheduling apps. Some are free, some you can pay monthly for. If you use Facebook, you can schedule. There is a whole calendar because you're using a professional site. You're not using your personal. You're either on a creative or a business platform on both Instagram and Facebook. I think that's important to mention. Like if you're using a private account or a personal account, you can't use a lot of tools that you can if you set up as a creative platform. Facebook in their business suite has a calendar that you can actually go into and you can schedule your whole month of posts, and you can schedule for both Facebook and Instagram. So you could go in on the first of the month and schedule all your posts and you're done. Obviously you have to make all those posts, so you set aside a day where you make graphics and you come up with captions and you have a little bank of hashtags. I keep mine in my notes app on my phone so I can just copy and paste them into posts, and then you can schedule. Instagram has a scheduling feature. You can schedule 1 post at a time. So you can do 5, but you can only do them 1 at a time. And then there are apps, there's all kinds of social calendar scheduling apps that you can use. And like I said, some are free, some are really expensive, like crazy expensive. I don't understand why anybody pays for them when you can do it inherently in Facebook. And, so like take some of the work off yourself so you don't always have to be thinking about it. Spend a day or two, spend 1 day coming up with your ideas for the month, spend the next day scheduling all of that, and then go back to your book.
Yeah. I think the main thing is, to me, the number one thing writers have to have is a passion for the story they're telling. Because if you don't have that passion, if you don't really believe in your story, if you think this is going to make you money, so you're doing it this way, it's going to read like that. It's so easy to spot. I probably get 3 or 4 manuscripts a month from people that they want me to look at, see if I want to work with them. And half of them, I don't feel any connection to. Okay. And I don't feel them connected to it. So what we need to do is make sure through all of the things that you do. And I think, Leslie, this is something that probably would come out in a query letter, don't you think?
Absolutely. But I think that's, they're kind of 2 schools, even with independent publishing. I think some people excel in the marketing area and they're just going to do book after book after book. And then there's the others who are really serious about the writing and the story, who have to kind of lean into the marketing, which is more challenging. But it's definitely, that I think that's the advantage of the 2 paths. If you're good at that, you can do more of it. Personally, I hate all the marketing stuff. I appreciate everything that Donna says, and I have to do it. But I really care about the writing, and definitely you can tell when someone's soul is in that story. And sometimes it's just because they took longer on it, but sometimes it's because the story is going to last a lifetime. And when you write a book, your name is in the Library of Congress. These stories are going to last far beyond us. So, for my preference, I think what you write matters.
Right. Naomi, do you find that too?
Yeah, I definitely. And I just want to say too, though, I mean, it is definitely important to believe in your story, but also not be too attached. Because if you're too attached, if every word is precious, you won't be able to work with an editor and you won't be able to grow and improve as a writer. And so there has to be a little bit of detachment. As much as you love what you wrote and spent hours, years, I should say. I've had people come to me working on books like for 10, 15 years, and, but at some point you just kind of have to like detach and let it go. And just, it becomes its own self that you want to then improve. And another thing I want to add is that, especially if you've just written your first book or you're writing your first book, this book might not be the book that you sell and publish, and that it's okay. It doesn't mean you're a failed writer. It's the book that's going to teach you how to be a writer and how to write those other books. And, I've worked with writers on their first books. They didn't publish it, but they wrote another book and it was a better book than the first. And they ended up publishing it. So it's a process, and it's about learning and enjoying. It's not the end; it's the journey.
Yeah. Writing is a craft. It's like painting or anything else. You have to do it over and over and over to perfect it and get better at it. It's not something you can just jump into. It takes time. It all takes time. So anyway, I think, does anyone have anything in summation they'd like? Adanna?
Yeah, I would just like to say that when it comes to your author platform, the thing that I run into the most when I'm talking with authors, when I'm first meeting them, is that I think that a lot of us are inherently shy and we don't want to do social media. I get a lot of pushback. It takes away from my writing time, stuff like that. And I just want to say that I think that it's really important, if you want the world to be able to read your work, that you have to be brave, because the whole process is brave. I mean, getting your book published is, it's a vulnerable moment, because you have really put so much time and effort into creating this story, right? And whether it's a memoir or it's a sci-fi dystopian world, we pour ourselves into writing. And I think that there's bravery in all of it. And you have to be willing to take that next step over into the kind of public light. And if you don't think that people care, and if you don't think you have anything to say, I'm here to tell you, you are wrong. Everybody can resonate out there in the world with somebody. Everybody's story does. Everybody has something to say, and others want to hear it. So that's my...
Well, be brave. Be brave. And you have to understand, like Adanna said, you're the brand. The book is just one of the products. It's like, this is General Mills, and here's all their cereals. Okay, you're General Mills, your books are these products down here. And people want to know about, who are you? Because nowadays I've watched this change over the last 15 years so much. We are so wrapped up in celebrity. The author is more important sometimes than the story. It's like, what is the author doing? Who are they? They want to get to know them. They want to hear from them. They want to listen to them on podcasts. They want to do all of those type of things. You've got to be brave and, join Toastmasters, if nothing else. I mean, it's an old fashioned way, but get yourself out there. Well, I think that's sort of a good wrap up for where we're at. And I want to thank all three of you for joining us today. And, thanks. That was really a good session, and hope to see all of you soon again.
Good luck with your writing.
Yeah.
Be brave.